This story is inspired by the works and life of Edgar Allan Poe, a master of Gothic horror and the macabre. Poe's tales often explore the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling the boundaries between madness, reality, and the supernatural. In this story, I've drawn inspiration from his themes of death, obsession, and the psychological descent into madness. By mimicking his signature style, rich with melancholic atmosphere, unreliable narrators, and dark, foreboding settings, this tale pays homage to Poe's genius while spinning a new, eerie mystery. Prepare to enter a world where the past haunts not only the mind, but the very fabric of reality itself. I had often heard it said that madness is a creeping thing, slowly overtaking its victim, unseen by the eyes of the world until it is too late. Little did I know, on that dark October evening, how closely I would come to understand this truth myself. It began innocently enough. I, Jonathan Reeve, a writer by trade, had spent the better part of a year researching Edgar Allan Poe for a biographical novel. Though my admiration for the man's work was vast, I had grown weary of the exhaustive delving into his tragic life, his personal demons, and his literary brilliance. I yearned for an end to my work, but it seemed the more I uncovered, the deeper I was pulled into the darkness of his legacy. It was during this fervent research that I received a peculiar letter. The letter was written in a delicate, spidery hand, the paper yellowed and brittle with age. There was no return address, only my name scrawled across the envelope in a script that sent an unsettling shiver through me. Inside was a brief message, inviting me to a small, obscure auction in Baltimore. It promised the sale of a rare and previously unknown manuscript, one written by none other than Edgar Allan Poe himself. A Poe manuscript, yet undiscovered? It seemed impossible. Scholars had combed through his work for over a century, declaring all of his writings accounted for. Yet the lure was undeniable. The date of the auction was set for the following week, and despite my better judgment, I resolved to attend. Baltimore was as I remembered it, gloomy and oppressive, as if the very air was heavy with the weight of the past. The auction was held in a decrepit, dimly lit building that had clearly seen better days. A handful of men and women, all scholarly in appearance, gathered in the room, their whispers hushed, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Among the items on display were trivial relics, a letter here, a signed photograph there, but none held my interest. It was when the final item was revealed that the room fell deathly silent. A small, leather-bound manuscript, its edges frayed, its cover worn, was brought forth. The auctioneer, a gaunt, severe-looking man, announced it with reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a rare treasure indeed, a heretofore unknown work by the late Edgar Allan Poe. The contents of this manuscript have never been read in public, nor have they been documented in any literary circles. It is titled, The Shadow's Grief." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but I felt something deeper, a cold, unsettling sensation creeping over me, as though I stood on the precipice of something far darker than mere words on a page. Despite the growing sense of dread, I found myself bidding aggressively for the manuscript. When the gavel finally struck, it was mine.
And sold.
I returned to my hotel room that night with the manuscript clutched in my hands, unable to shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. Yet curiosity, and perhaps something more insidious, drove me to open it. The first few pages were what one might expect: Poe's familiar style, his lyrical prose, his morbid fascination with death and the unknown. But as I delved deeper into the shadow's grief, the narrative began to shift. The story told of a man haunted by a dark presence, a shadow that followed him relentlessly, whispering terrible things in his ear, driving him to the brink of madness. It spoke not just of death, but of something far worse. An existence beyond the grave that was neither life nor death. A liminal state where the soul was trapped, consumed by sorrow. As I read, a strange sensation overtook me. The air in the room grew colder, the flickering light of the lamp seemed to dim, and a sense of overwhelming despair settled over me. The words on the page began to blur, twisting and writhing as though they had a life of their own. I tried to stop reading, to put the manuscript down, but my hands refused to obey. I was transfixed, held captive by the words, as though they had reached out and ensnared me. It was then that I noticed something strange about the manuscript. Hidden among the lines of prose were strange cryptic symbols, barely noticeable at first, but now glaringly obvious. They appeared at irregular intervals, their meaning indecipherable, yet they seemed to pulse with a dark energy. My heart raced, and a sickening realization dawned upon me. This was no ordinary manuscript. The shadow in the story, the presence that tormented the protagonist, it was not merely a figment of fiction, it was real, and it was here. I tried to shake the thought from my mind, but as the hours passed, I began to hear things, soft whispers, barely audible, as though someone was speaking just out of earshot. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, the result of reading too deeply into Poe's dark narrative, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became impossible to ignore. "Return the manuscript," they said. "It is not yours to keep." I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was empty, of course, but the sense of being watched, of not being alone, was overwhelming. I glanced at the manuscript, now lying innocuously on the desk, and a wave of nausea washed over me. What had I unleashed? Over the next few days, the whispers followed me everywhere. They grew louder, more aggressive, invading my every waking moment, until I could no longer tell where they ended and my thoughts began. I found myself muttering to them, answering their demands, pleading for them to stop, but they would not be silenced. I began to see things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, darting just beyond the edge of perception. They watched me, waited for me, growing bolder with each passing day. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt them drawing closer, their cold breath on the back of my neck, their fingers brushing against my skin. In my desperation, I sought out experts, scholars of Poe, literary historians, but none could offer any explanation for the manuscript's strange power. Some dismissed it as a hoax, others claimed it was a forgery, but none could deny the unsettling aura that surrounded it. One evening, in a fit of madness, I decided to destroy the manuscript. I gathered it in my hands, prepared to throw it into the fireplace. But as I held it over the flames, a terrible voice rang out in my mind, louder than ever before. "You cannot destroy what has already been written." The words echoed in my skull, reverberating through my very being, and my hands froze. I could not bring myself to drop the manuscript into the fire. Instead, I collapsed to the floor, weeping, clutching the cursed pages to my chest as the shadows closed in around me. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. I could no longer tell. Time had become meaningless. The whispers had ceased, but in their place was something far worse. A deep, suffocating silence. The shadows no longer watched from the corners of the room. Now, they were inside me. I could feel them, crawling beneath my skin, seeping into my bones, consuming my mind. They whispered no longer because they had no need to. I was theirs. I write this now, with trembling hands, in the hope that someone, somewhere, might understand the terrible fate that has befallen me. The manuscript still sits on my desk, untouched since that fateful night, but I know it is not over. The shadow is still with me, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it can claim me fully. If you are reading this, heed my warning. Do not seek out the manuscript of the shadow's grief. It is not a mere story. It is a doorway to something far darker, far more terrible than death itself. And once you open that door, there is no going back. The manuscript of the shadow's grief was found in Jonathan Reeves' possession after his mysterious disappearance. No trace of him has ever been found, and those who have dared to read the cursed document report strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows that seem to move of their own accord. Some have claimed that the manuscript is a lost work of Edgar Allan Poe, but no one can say for certain. It is said that the manuscript now resides in a private collection, locked away, never to be read again, or so they hope.